Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us here today. I am Carolina Alberna, CEO of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce based in Toronto. I'd like to welcome to our 6th BCCC IST Forum that this year will discuss smart cities and urban mobility, organized in partnership with the Consulate General of Canada in São Paulo. We're providing simultaneous translation for the event, so if you wanted to hear the presentations in Portuguese, please click on the interpretation icon in the bottom of your screen and change the language to Portuguese. The term smart cities is often used to describe different ideas with distinct approaches in development and different realities. Canadian cities are regularly cited as in various global smart cities indexes. And while the implementation of smart cities always face the issue of increasing costs, success of smart city project depends not only on the amount of money spent, but also on what choices are made. While technology continues to be the main driver behind the adoption and implementation of smart city solutions, Canada generally emphasizes a more human-centered approach to creating urban spaces that focus on community needs and where technology and data become a tool to improve society. Ideally, cities not only deploy technologies, but also create it within the community in a sustainable development approach to address growing urbanization challenges. This event will showcase the trends in urban mobility in Canada and what are the main challenges in Brazil for the implementation of a more human-centric approach to smart cities. And on the regulatory side, we will showcase the impact of the new LGPD and other regulations for the implementation of new technologies in Brazil. So before I introduce our first panelist, I would like to remind everyone that the speakers will be available to answer questions. So please don't be shy and send any questions you might have through the Q&A box located in the bottom of your screen. We've allowed attendees to upvote and answer questions to incentivize positive discussion. So feel free to add your comments and the questions throughout the presentations. Just a quick overview for those who are not familiar with the BCCC. We're a membership-based association that supports its members through information, networking, and advocacy. And for nearly 50 years, we've been building relationships between Brazil and Canada, strengthening the bilateral relationship in investment, trade, best practices, and mutual growth and prosperity. Our relationships are private and public, featuring managing directors and decision makers from companies and institutions of all sizes. And our volunteer board of directors has expertise, knowledge, and connections that can only be found by being active players in the Brazil-Canada market. I would like to invite, before we go for our first presenter, I'd like to invite Marcio Francischini, who is the Senior Trade Commissioner at the Consulate of Canada in São Paulo, to say a few words. Marcio.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us today. This is our last event of the year. It's been a busy year in our calendar, but this is one of the events that we have been very excited to host because it actually touches areas and topics of interest that touches pretty much in our lives, daily lives. And will continue to impact us strongly in the future as cities develop new technologies and new trends for smart transportation. We have today a great roster of participants, and so we welcome you again and hope that you enjoy what we expect to be a great discussion on smart cities, smart transportation trends and challenges. Welcome.
Thank you, Marcio. So without further ado, I would like to introduce and to invite Dr. Ted Hewitt, President at Social Science and Human Resource Canada, Canadian co-chair of the Canada-Brazil Joint Committee of Science, Innovation, and Technology, and executive board member of the BCCC, to say a few words for the opening remarks. Ted?
Muito obrigado, Carolina. Bom dia, colegas, Suas Excelências. Heather Cameron, bonjour, nobrega. It's really great to see you all here today. Bonjour, collègues. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi d'être ici parmi vous pour cette rencontre importante. I'm really here in three roles. Maybe Carolina didn't know that when she asked me to speak, but it doesn't mean I'm going to talk longer, just maybe for 4 or 5 minutes, if you can bear with me. First of all, as co-chair of the Canada-Brazil Joint Committee for Science, Technology, and Innovation, we've been meeting bilaterally at the highest level for nearly 10 years now to remove barriers, to greater cooperation in science, technology, and innovation between Canada and Brazil, to facilitate contacts and to build bridges between the two countries, between companies, between post-secondary institutions, between people, between governments. So it's been a labor of love for me, absolutely. I'm also here, as Carolina said, as president of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, because we're one of several funding councils in Canada with about $4.5 billion in resources that are funding and continue to fund in some good measure, increasingly, research that crosses boundaries and borders between Brazil and Canada in all areas, from social sciences to business and health. And that collaboration is increasing, and the number of opportunities for joint collaboration between the two countries are growing, for example, with the introduction of our New Frontiers in Research Fund. And I would urge you to please take the time to have a look at some of these, because many are open to industry as partners, and some of them, such as the NRC's Canadian Innovation International Innovation Program, is open to industry and can be funded. I'm also here as what some people call Brazilianista, as someone who studies Brazil and has for many decades now. I'm actually, people don't know this, but I'm probably more of a Paulistanista than a Brazilianista, because I've been studying Sao Paulo for many, many years, going back to my teenage years, and then professionally as an academic at the University of Western Ontario, and continue in this role. I publish regularly on issues related to Brazil and Canada and developments in Brazil particularly. And in my work on Sao Paulo, I've actually made a number of observations over the years with respect to introduction of smart city type innovations, and certainly ones that enhance mobility. I would say, and most of you know, maybe in this room, but not generally, if you visited Sao Paulo, the thing you're likely to note and to say is that the city doesn't work. This seems to be the most notable thing people say, you know, at Sao Paulo, you know, this thing is just takes so long and it doesn't work. In fact, the thing to note about Sao Paulo is that it does work in the function that it does. And given the size that it is, it's absolutely phenomenal. And the number of innovations that have been introduced over the years, some of which I've studied, some of which involve collaboration with Canada, are notable and are making great, helping Sao Paulo to make great progress. So the introduction of bus lanes nearly 20 or 30 years ago, the world-class metro that's been developed, now bikeways, even the ambulance service has been tailored to account for times that it would take for an ambulance to get to hospital by placing resources directly on ambulances. And in fact, that was based on a Toronto model. So this is a topic which for me is incredibly interesting, and I look forward to hearing some of the interventions over the course of the conference and beyond, and for helping, along with all of you, to find ways for Canada and Brazil to collaborate more effectively in science, technology, innovation, business, and every other way culturally that we can think about, particularly in the post-COVID area. And this session is a key part of that process. So thank you, Carolina. Again, welcome to all, and I look forward to a great session today.
Thank you, Dr. Hewitt, and thank you for the words and to share all your experience with us. So next, I would like to invite then Dr. Heather Cameron, Consul General of Canada in São Paulo, to say a few words during the welcome remarks. Dr. Cameron, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks very much for the invitation. Boa tarde, bonjour. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to open the sixth annual discussion, and to continue therefore a dialogue between Canada and Brazil about smart cities and making our urban environments work for all. Let me say thank you to the BCCC for its collaboration throughout the year, and as well to the Embassy of Brazil in Ottawa and the Consulate General in Toronto, represented here by Ambassador Nobrega this afternoon, for all of the collaboration throughout 2021. And we're looking forward to working together again in 2022. Many other people to thank. Fondazione Vanzolini for the ongoing cooperation with the Consulate General in Toronto, and a particular thanks to the University of Toronto today and Professor Eric Miller for your participation. I know U of T has so many interesting partnerships here within Brazil, but we're grateful for you taking the time today to share your knowledge about how Canada views and develops smart city projects. Hoje, tout le monde, one language or the other, hoje vocês terão a oportunidade de ouvir mais detalhes sobre os motivos que fazem Canadá uma referência mundial no desenvolvimento de cidades inteligentes. E para nós todos, depois da conferência de Glasgow, estas questões são muito mais importantes, porque precisamos essas cidades inteligentes, as urbanas, cidades que funcionam bem para reduzir os efeitos das mudanças climáticas sobre a população, mesmo se a população é brasileira ou canadense. Canada and Brazil, we have a great collaboration over many years, and Dr. Hewitt has just mentioned part of it. And urban development has been a surprisingly big piece of collaboration between our two countries. And our science and technology relationship has much to grow, and an official agreement between our two countries creates an important framework for collaborations between researchers, between private sectors, the research community, citizens, and other actors. So without further words, I'll pass it back to Carolina and wish everyone a great discussion. Muito obrigada por sua participação hoje. Obrigada. Bonsoir.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron, for your words and for all the incredible work that you're doing in Brazil to help Canadian companies to enter the Brazilian market as well. So we really cherish the partnership. So next, I'd like to invite then Ambassador Vanja Nóbrega, Consul General of Brazil in Toronto, to say a few words. Ambassador.
Muito obrigada, Carolina. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Heather, for your kind words. And Dr. Hewitt, is very nice to know that you are Paulistanista, so it makes a huge difference, and I'm pretty sure everybody will take a good note of that, because São Paulo is such an incredible city to live and to learn from. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup à tout le monde aujourd'hui qui attend le webinaire. Merci spécialement à BCCC, au Consulat du Canada au São Paulo. And I'm pretty sure that everybody here is fascinated by this complex theme, smart cities and urban mobility. In Toronto, besides being one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world, is considered also one of the first Canadian cities labeled as a smart city. Actually, I feel that to live in Toronto is to witness every day the struggle to find better technology solutions to be applied to everyday life situations. It's also to realize that we urban residents have much more challenges ahead to cope with. And the increase in urban population requires constant and fast solutions in many aspects, such as public transportation, logistics system, which was very much required in the last 2 years, as well as health, network and system, and many other aspects. Therefore, I believe that today's webinar is very appropriate to set the stage to learn from one another, from Canada and from Brazil, regarding different aspects of urban lives. It's important for us to share experiences and to discuss which solutions could be adapted to one another reality, and most especially how and what's the best way for Brazil and Canada to cooperate with each other in order to create a dynamic, sustainable urban environment. These challenges concern all of us, especially those who live in big cities. We always dream to live in a city which works in an intelligent way. However, to achieve this dream or this ideal stage, it needs appropriate investment, knowledge, and cooperation to be sustainable. The discussion we will witness today with this amazing team will be an important opportunity to discover the potential in Brazil and in Canada, opportunities in cooperation, in business, in technology, in education, in investment, but most of all, in human beings. And regarding technology and internet access, it's worthwhile to mention that 78.3% of the Brazilian population are already connected with the internet, which represents a tremendous achievement considering the size of the country and the diversity of its population. However, Brazil still has several challenges to face, and I would like to mention one of them. 93% of urban schools have access to internet. However, only 45% of rural schools are connected. I'm confident that the present webinar will give us all an exquisite opportunity to learn, to think, and to discover the existing possibilities and potentialities between Brazil and Canada regarding smart cities and urban mobility. Merci beaucoup, and I wish an excellent event. Muito obrigada, bonjour, soirée, e tenha excelente webinar. Obrigada.
Obrigada, Embaixadora. Thank you so much, Ambassador Nóbrega, for being here with us and for your words. So now I would like to invite our first speaker of the day, Professor Eric Miller, Director at University of Toronto Transportation Research Institute and Director at Mobility Lab at the School of Cities, to present on trends in smart transit and urban mobility in Canada. Professor Miller, thank you very much for your participation here today. We're very happy to be organizing this discussion in partnership with the University of Toronto. So without further ado, stage is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Carolina, and thank you so much to BCC and everyone for inviting me here. It's my great pleasure to be here, especially with the Sao Paulo connection. It's been my good fortune to have visited Sao Paulo a couple of times a few years ago, so I have some appreciation of both the opportunities and the challenges and issues facing Sao Paulo, but also other particularly large cities in the Latin American context. So I want to talk about smart transit and urban mobility from a Canadian lens, but recognizing the Brazilian background to this. I think any conversation about smart mobility and particularly transit probably needs these days to begin to recognize that we live in a world of disruption. And that disruption is coming from a tremendous number of different points of the compass, shall we say. First of all, and as you well know in Brazil, the massive urbanization that's been going on globally for decades now and is going to continue to go on has created a first world problem. How we build our cities is how we build our countries, our economies, our societies. And transit, of course, is an incredibly critical component of that whole process. We are also particularly, it has always been with us, but particularly in the last few years, the quest for social and economic equity, a much greater justice, shall we say, for all within our cities, our societies, has come to the forefront. And again, transit plays an incredibly important role, and transportation in general, mobility in these discussions about equity in our cities. And climate change is with us, has been with us. Again, it's coming to the forefront. We've just had COP26. Major challenges to how we build more sustainable cities. How do we achieve our carbon targets? And again, transportation is one of the major components of that discussion. And then on top of that, as we all know, both in Canada and Brazil, we have something called COVID-19 that's been giving us a bit of a problem for the last 2 years. again, stressing us in all sorts of different directions and stressing transit. This little bar chart here shows our commuter rail system in Toronto, and here was pre-COVID, and here's what's been happening since in terms of ridership on our commuter rail. This is our main, at the height of the lockdown, this is Union Station in Toronto, our main transportation hub in the city. So you know, the pandemic has put huge stresses on all aspects of society, but again, transit and questions of how transit recovers from this. What will be the recovery path for transit is a very open question, I think, for all of us. But then what I really want to talk about today, and I think the focus of today's conversation, is before COVID, and in parallel to these other disruptions, technology has been disrupting the transportation sector and particularly transit for a number of years. This has been a big topic of conversation, and technology, I think, is disrupting our field in two major ways. First of all, the creating new technologies and services. So connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and I'll talk a bit more about those in a few minutes. But also the artificial intelligence and the computing platforms, which I'll also talk about, that enable us to be providing new mobility services, mobility as a service, in ways that just wasn't feasible even a few years ago. And this is fundamentally changing transportation almost everywhere in a way that arguably we haven't seen this sort of disruption since the early 20th century, with the introduction of the automobile, in particular mass production of cars, the Model T and so forth. So it's truly how we move people is fundamentally changing and will continue to change. But the other way technology has been changing us is through ICT, information communication technologies, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and the access to big data sets that allow us to see the city and to control the city and monitor it and model and both understand the city, but also perhaps exert control over it in ways that we haven't been able to do before. And so these are there's two sides of the technology coin: the technologies themselves, the services, but also the information that we can make use of really underlies everything I'm going to be saying. So with that hopefully brief intro, I do want to focus on smart transit and mobility within Canada. Just a very brief, very incomplete survey. There's lots of things going on here. This reflects kind of, to a certain extent, my own interest perhaps, but also to a certain extent also what's going on relatively locally here in Ontario, the Toronto area. But I want to just provide a flavor of, I think, some of the dimensions of the way technology and smart transit, smart mobility is evolving and will continue to evolve. It's very early days, I think, in most respects with respect to much of this. So I've divided this up into sort of six snippets that often interrelate, but trying to focus on different aspects of this issue of smart transit and mobility. So on-demand transit, electrification of transit, autonomous vehicles in transit area. All of these depend upon computing platforms, but I want to say a few things about them directly. All of them involve big data and data science, and then perhaps a bit of a out of left field, partially because this is one of the things I do, trying to say just a word or two about agent-based microsimulation. Again, our ability to analyze and model and project and design systems in ways that perhaps we couldn't, because now we have the data and the technology to do so. So on-demand transit, or demand responsive transit, is something that's been with us forever. As a graduate student at MIT back in the dark ages, I worked on what we call dial-a-ride scheduling algorithms to schedule demand responsive services. So these ideas have been with us for decades and decades. But what has changed in the last decade or so are the computing platforms, are the data availability, the algorithms, the apps, that are really making demand responsive transit a much more viable alternative. And as this diagram is trying to illustrate, there's a wide variation of these services. At the one extreme are our traditional fixed route transit, running buses, big buses on fixed schedule. At the other end are the individual car ride hailing type, Uber, Lyft type, DD type services. But then in between, there's a wide range of different service options. Lots of experimentation going on in this area. Different concepts, different ideas being tried and tested in different ways. So this is an area of great fermentation at the moment and evolution, but highly promising in many markets and sub-markets to particularly replace some of the fixed route transit with more flexible service concepts. One of our postdocs here, William Klumpenhofer, a year or so ago, did a survey of Canada, a major survey of within Canadian transit municipalities, looking at the state of demand responsive services at that time. And one can see that a large number of municipalities across the country either have or are planning to implement, and again, this data is about a year old, demand responsive services of one sort or another. So this is an area of great activity, great interest in Canada, and again, a lot of different models out there that we can learn from. This is also an area of great interest in the private sector. A lot of startups, small companies, larger companies, getting into this area, building their computer platform that they can then provide service, contract, work with public transit agencies to provide various different sorts of services. Again, many different service models. So Pantonium, for example, is a company that one of its models is take your full-size buses that are being underutilized and make better use of them, run them on demand instead of in fixed routes, and you can get at the same cost or less cost, you can get higher productivity and much better service. And I think that's one of the two sides of all of this, I think, for transit is, on the one hand, higher productivity, cost effectiveness, but at the same time, much better service for your customers. And in so many, particularly more suburban areas, running fixed route buses on fixed schedules, big buses, they're very costly to run, and you're providing usually pretty lousy service, to be frank. And so I think the challenge in all of this is, can we provide better service at the same price or even less? And I'll talk a bit more about Pantonium in a second. Another example, another company largely out of the US, but also working in Canada is Via, not to be confused for the Canadians with Via Rail. This is a private sector company that, again, has a platform-based system that they can provide different solutions. They do a lot of school bus routing, a lot of different applications running off of the technology they have available to do scheduling, matching demand with supply in a more dynamic sort of way. We also have a number of municipal experiments have been underway for the last little while. And this is a map. Here's downtown Toronto. I'm sitting right about there in my office at UOT at the moment. But in recent years or ongoing, big experiment in Belleville, Innisfil, Niagara Falls, Niagara region, and in Durham. And the Belleville experiment was actually with Belleville Transit contracted with Pantonium to take their evening and night service and run it on demand. And the University of Toronto actually worked with Pantonium and Belleville to monitor and assess and evaluate the impact of going to on demand. Very successful. Again, better quality service at the same or reduced costs. Durham Regional Transit, the region just to the east of Toronto, has gone to, on a number of their routes, they've replaced their routes with demand responsive services. This is specifically a COVID related response. When COVID hit, they lost all their riders. And so to try to keep some service going, reduce costs, but provide service for those who needed it. They've gone to an on-demand system, developed the app, working very, very well. They're expanding the service. Niagara region, similarly, across the lake from us in Toronto, has gone to demand responsive for a number of their services. Because again, the density of demand, these services are much better suited to provide good quality service to areas that can't support traditional heavy rail or other major services. Something quite different, the little town of Innisfil, which is north of Toronto, it's a bit of a resort town, had a very small traditional bus service. They got rid of their bus service altogether and they contracted with Uber. And now anybody to subsidize Uber trips. So anybody who is formerly taking a transit trip, Uber comes and picks you up and takes you where you want to go. So it's totally a door-to-door service that's replacing in this small town the transit service. So it costs money. It has to be subsidized, but they're saving money relative to what they're spending on the buses, and people are getting better service. Another example of another company in this area, which is again doing something a bit different, a startup here in Toronto, is Swift Ride. They're not doing transit per se, they're doing carpool. So they're providing apps to match people together to sort of form their own little ride sharing groups. And they're working with particularly companies for their employees to pool together. Now, obviously, that not much of that's happening these days because nobody's going to work, but nevertheless, another example of how technology can be used in an innovative way to provide higher quality service at good prices. Electrification is a major issue. Just want to highlight some of my colleagues here at the University of Toronto. We have UTEV, the University of Toronto Electric Vehicle Research Center, which is diving deep into the technology side of electric vehicles, batteries, charging infrastructure, all the technology we need to make electrified vehicles really work at scale. Much of their work is looking at cars, not buses to start with, but obviously these technologies all apply to transit vehicles as well. Still many technological challenges, battery life, fast charging, etc., that we need to be working on. And so UOT is trying to lead the charge on some of that. Another group, it's not a university group, but there is an NGO consortium, QTRIC, Canadian Urban Transit Research Innovation Consortium, very, very active in this field. They're a nonprofit that works with industry, works with government to really prototype and experiment with and implement tech solutions in this area. They have major projects going on across the country, a battery electric bus demonstration big trial, a hydrogen fuel cell, because it's not just batteries. Hydrogen fuel cell is still a very, very viable option. Looking at procurement, I mean, for transit agencies, a huge issue is just procuring and getting to economies of scale, both from the agency side and from the production side, to be able to bring technology to bear, and also looking at the data side of things, how we could be gathering data and making better use of it. The city of Winnipeg, out west in the province of Manitoba, has been a leader in testing electric bus fleets. New Flyer is a Canadian bus manufacturer housed in Winnipeg, and so they've been working with it. They had a major 4-year trial demonstrating, quite early days, electrification of buses. By next year, they'll have 16 more buses in service, and they're working towards, it's still labeled as a test, but they're working towards a full electric fleet sooner than later. Other issues, I mean, again, university researchers looking at biodiesel as a possible interim type fuel to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in some of our fleets, easier to transition to. We also do here, our track group does a huge amount of emissions and greenhouse gas modeling, measurement actual measurements of pollution, but also modeling. Have done major studies looking at the impact of electric vehicles, in this case cars, on society in Ontario. We can quantify the benefits of this very directly, and show clearly the need and what can happen if we can electrify. If policies will support that. Briefly, just want to autonomous vehicles. Again, just to highlight another group here within UTRI, within our Transportation Research Institute, CATS, Center for Automated and Transformed Transportation Systems, is is a research program looking more at the planning and operations side of autonomous vehicles, not how to design the technology per se, but assuming the technology is forthcoming, what will be its impacts on society? How should we be planning for it? How should we be designing our networks and our services to maximize the benefits of autonomous vehicles and minimize the disbenefits? Because as with any technology, AVs have fairly significant cons, perhaps, if not managed well, relative to pros in terms of their impact on transportation and on the city as a whole. We do have a couple of municipal experiments also underway or in the works dealing specifically with transit shuttles, one in Toronto, in the east end of Toronto, and one in Whitby. In Toronto, with the West Rouge area, again, the extreme eastern part of the city of Toronto, a city is launching an automated shuttle trial. There he is, cute little guy. It will have a person on board just for safety reasons. It started in September. It's going to run probably through the winter time to test winter conditions. Certainly in Canada, winter is a major issue with AVs, as with everything else. And in Whitby, they have a little autonomous shuttle that runs along their waterfront along Lake Ontario, again, as a demonstration project and testing these vehicles. So again, early days, but interesting things going on. As I mentioned several times, all of this technology is built upon computer-based platforms that take in data, process it, analyze it, spit it out in terms of controls. Again, at U of T, we've been in this business. Leon Garcia, who's a professor in our electrical and computing engineering field, has built a smart city platform we call CVST, Connected Vehicles Smart Transportation, that demonstrates the ability to take in data from any source, organize it, and then be able to display it back out, build machine learning tools on top of it to make use of the data in a variety of different sort of applications. And then a second example of a second platform, another professor in my department here in civil engineering, Professor Abdohai, has built something within our iCity program that he calls ITSOS. And again, this kind of illustrates, just so the kind of the overall structure of what these platforms look like is that we have to be bringing data in, managing it, and then we can add analytics and software and develop application programming to generate applications that people can actually be accessing this data in a variety of ways. So again, one way or the other, everything I've been talking about, all these services are built on a platform of one sort or another that will look something like this. Again, we've been talking about big data, So again, the world of sensors we live in, the fact that every smartphone is a sensor, every car is a sensor. We're getting huge amount every time somebody taps a transit smart card to get on a bus. That's data that's being recorded. Credit card transactions. I mean, as we all know, we're swimming in an ocean of data that's coming in continuously, streams of data. Much of it tells us a lot about transit usage, transportation usage. The question is, how do we make use of that to manage our systems, to provide information to users so that they can make better decisions, so that we can understand system performance and travel behavior so we can design better systems. So many initiatives in this regard. Again, at U of T, we have Professor Amr Shalaby has recently started the Transit Analytics Lab, which is specifically working with industry and transit agencies in this area of bringing of developing the ability to handle much larger amounts of data about transit systems and usage, and applying advanced computational, but also data science, machine learning techniques to be able to provide much better management support, management operational support to transit agencies, much better understanding of transit ridership. So, for example, just one project Amr's has been working on is responding to disruptions in the system. The subway goes down, we have to provide buses, managing the response to there's almost daily disruptions to the system, doing a much better job of managing the responses to the disruptions. And one can imagine lots and lots of other applications of advanced data science in transit operations and management. Another kind of data or another kind of research and applications is using these data streams to understand travel behavior and in various ways. So as I say, every smartphone is a sensor. Every cell phone, whether it's not even a smartphone, we can track cell phones through space. Smartphones have GPS tracking capabilities on them. And so I've done some work in both in Montevideo specifically, where we've been working both with transit smart card data and cell phone data to see how we can make use of it. And I'm conscious I'm running over time. So I'll just say all of this data can also be used in agent-based microsimulation to build models of travel behavior in cities. And again, we've done some work in Asuncion, where we actually tried to develop a prototype model demonstrating how we could make use of some of this data to model travel behavior. And we've also, in Toronto, these models are operational. We've transferred the model from Toronto to a small city in Chile just to see how well these methods work and demonstrate that they can work in a Latin American context. So apologies for running a few minutes late here. Hopefully it was worthwhile. Hopefully I can answer some questions at some point in time. So Carolina, I'll turn it back over to you now.
Thank you so much, Professor Miller, for your presentation and for introducing so many amazing technologies to support smart transit in Canada that can totally be expandable to Brazil as well. So appreciate you being here today, and we'll leave the questions again. A reminder to our audience, if you have any questions, please add to the Q&A, and we will have a quick roundtable discussion after the presentations that will be moderated by Marcio. So add your questions in the box, in the Q&A box, so we can get there and answer them when it's time. So next, I would like then to invite Professor José Alberto Quintanilla, who is a Senior Associate Professor in the Technical Division of Management Science and Environmental Technology at the Institute of Energy and Environment of the University of São Paulo, USP, to discuss, to show a presentation about what's going on in Brazil and the researchers they're doing at the university as well. So Professor Quintanilla, thanks for being here. It's stage is yours.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Paulo. Good afternoon, good morning, and bonjour. It's a pleasure to me to be here today with all of you. My name is José Alberto Quintanilla. I'm a senior professor of the University of São Paulo in Brazil. I thank the organization of the 7th edition of the Brazil-Canada IST Forum and the Brazil-Canada Chambers of Commerce for the opportunity offered. My team partners in the Connect Cities Laboratory are Fernando Bersanetti, Cláudia Machado, Charles Yamamura, Harmi Takia, and Mariana Lage. We share this presentation. The objective of this presentation, the title is Urban Mobility, Vehicle and Ride Sharing, Connect Cidades Research. We are showing you recent research on urban mobility developed by the Laboratory of Cities, Technology and Urbanism, Connect Cidade, Connect City, of the Department of the Production Engineer from Polytechnic School of the Universidade of São Paulo. This picture shows a caricature of the general problem, which we will refer only a part of them. Current situation of the most large and medium size, as Professor Miller regarded me, São Paulo is a mega city, and a few mega cities in the world. So all the problems here are increased, are big. High social and finance costs, transport systems collapse. An implication, we can call the urban immobility. The future of the mobility. The question to be addressed, how we move in the future. Nowadays, some people defend that the current trend is usership, a goodbye to ownership. You know, you can buy a car, you cannot buy a car, but use a car or a bus. Consumers of all types of goods and services are migrating from ownership to usership. We call this moment and this result with the disruptive technologies in urban mobility. Smart vehicles, electric vehicles, connected, autonomous vehicles or ride sharing. Here, selection of our recent publications in the last 4 years in journals of high impact and with good citation rates. We have, since 2008, we are trying to work with these subjects. We are refer only to connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, but we are discuss a little or a few with share mobility, models of share mobility. Here we show 3 kinds of share mobility. Standard-based and station-based round trip, free float one-way, and station-based one-way. There is not the only modus that exist. The combinations of these 3 and other modus exist for ride sharing, for sharing mobility. Sorry. The problem with we addressed is where to place a car share station. We have a real problem from the vehicle industry where to put car sharing station. The proposed mods provide share vehicle access to general public. We consider now integration between public transport and car sharing, improving mobility, traffic, and environment. The result point best of car sharing location and potential part for several kinds of commercial establishments is city of São Paulo. Here one model designed by Geographic Information Systems. We use only one model of the car sharing, one-way car sharing. This is the possible location of the car sharing stations. Here is some special simulation. In green, the stores from the manufacturer. In blue, the buffer from the main areas of the possible installation of the stores for station car sharing station. Here the same situation is studied by another technology, the Voronoi polygons. The Voronoi solving, probably using better balanced factors, business factors homologation, using the special data analysis from free publicly available data sets and the car maker service network. The method yields to the most favorable district in São Paulo city to implement the share systems. Here, the regions, here, streets, lines. Another problem with we address it is the car sharing fleet size optimization. The work simulates a micro-scale car sharing client interaction use a proposed mixed integer linear programming, MILP, model to optimize the fleet size of car sharing servers for one-way and round-trip models. The proposed model aims to maximize the number of served clients and to minimize the number of clients to be allocated in each carrier station, giving preference to balance the fleet size among the stations. Here, only one example. We use here only the consumer is disposal to no walking or walking 500 meters to share the vehicle. We have many other simulations to choose the best configuration. Some points, some comments. In São Paulo, we conclude that for trips less than 1 hour, you can use the Uber, like Uber. For 1 hour to 8 hours, maybe car sharing is a good option. For more than 8 hours, rent a car is the best solution. We have discussion and data about this simulation for travels, little short travels. We can use the Uber or the application services. Another comment, as the São Paulo doesn't have a strong service of car sharing. Is in the beginnings, and few cars in general, expensive cars are offered to the clients. Another aspect that this is a research we are working now, is the electromobility. We are working in partnership with São Paulo Company of Urban Transport, SP Trans. We consider electric vehicles becoming viable urban transportation solution. Charging infrastructure is one issue. This is an important point in São Paulo, particularly in Brazil in general. We don't have a good structure for locate charging stations. We propose a set of procedures to identify the most suitable locations for electrical vehicles charging stations in São Paulo. The study shows the districts with the highest demand for charging and those in the central area where the population has the highest purchasing power. And this is another problem with the mobility in general in São Paulo. We have a very big difference in the socioeconomic conditions. The charging station location process may be applied to other cities, maybe other big cities. And it's possible to use additional variables to measure social inequality. Here, one example, or to place, according to the variables we used, all the variables came from the public data database. This is São Paulo municipality, and here is the center of São Paulo municipality. Here is the main part of the center of São Paulo, where the people were biggest acquisitive power lives. Here some districts chosen by the methodology. There is a contrast. The location of, we use some few existing charging stations. They are used as a reference in comparing with the results from the adopted procedure. Only 2 different places were detected in regions where socioeconomic disparities are substantial. Here an example. This picture seems a fake, but it's real. The poor part of town and the rich part of town together. This is one program. Only 2 different places were detected. This is one of these places. Future work may contemplate other factors, such as origin destination metrics. We have this São Paulo has a good origin destination research by Metro of São Paulo. But the last one is in 2017. So the data are not so actualized, so new. On the point of the interest to provide a more accurate estimates of the number of trips, the origin destination, and preferred times of trip and user, for example. Besides digital margins for hotels and unnamed but aerial vehicles, display units are better than a city administrative district, which is the disposal data today, improve the possible results. Nowadays, we are working with Spetrans, discussion about electric bus. We did a bibliometric, it's not a bibliometric, bibliometric review, bibliographic review, some what the world is doing in related to electric bus. Why electric bus? Reduction of whole weight emissions, achieving sustainable levels of the energy consumption for transport, reduction of the noise, are some aspects of the subject. We used this suggestion from this study in Beijing. Diesel bus roads with average speed lower than 12 kilometers should be electrified due to their high fuel consumption. The company is using similar numbers, maybe not 12, but less than this, to test on one line with electrical vehicles, electrical bus. Roads with less than 20 stops per more than 1 kilometer deserve special attention, as electrification can provide significant energy efficient. This is one problem we need to address. Where address the stops from the bus line, the electrical bus line. Where address the station, the charging station. São Paulo has a dirty traffic. It's very difficult to move in São Paulo. So in different regions, with different conditions. So this is a big problem to be addressed by the university and by the urban company of transportation of São Paulo. Routes must be planned, taking downhill segments in account for energy efficient. This is one aspect we are trying to find in the first time. Data about elevation in São Paulo in a good scale for our work is difficult. Now we are trying to use technologies, GPS and other equipments inside and outside the bus to try to measure the declivity of some streets of some routes of us in São Paulo. It's a big job, and nowadays we are preparing this job. Considering research and budget limitations, a mix of diesel and electric bus fleet is possible. Nowadays, there is only one electrical line, bus electrical line in São Paulo. And in the peak hour, they mix diesel and electric bus in this period. Optimization is achieved with the electrical bus operating peak hours and diesel bus off-peak. This is a suggestion from these authors. This we need to try to test in São Paulo or in parts of São Paulo, in regions of São Paulo. Então, the future networks planning should focus on reducing stops. Is a difficult problem in São Paulo. And many people use public transportation. Spacing them and adopt direct routes. It is almost impossible to determine this as well. We have some express lines, of the corridors, but it's not enough and have many stops and each stop is longer. Research opportunities.
Professor Quintanilla, we only have a couple more minutes, okay? And then we have to pass it enough. Thank you.
I heard the Professor Miller, and a lot of other points. We note about the research opportunities, or autonomous vehicle with challenges of urban mobility, accessibility, ability, resilience, exhaustion of natural resource, emissions and climate. We have a problem today with the battery of the bus, electric bus. And maybe in the near future, we can use or discuss the mobility with the F2s, the taxis or the buses by F2s. I would like to thank to Professor Marcelo Scheneck, Engenheiro César Massaro from São Paulo University, Carolina, Mariana, and Christine from Brazil-Canada Chambers of Commerce. Thank you very much.
Professor, for your presentation here. So now I would like to invite quickly Felipe Tavares, who is a partner at BMA Law, to talk about the regulatory framework, LGPD, and the Brazilian Smart Cities program. So Felipe, thank you for being here, and the stage is yours.
Thanks, Carolina. Hi, everyone. And thanks again, BCCC, for the invitation. I'm going to be quick. I know we don't have a lot of time, and I'm the lawyer, so the legal stuff usually is not the one that is the most important here in this kind of event, although I believe that there's a lot of things we could speak on this topic. But first and foremost, when we speak about smart cities, there's no way not to talk about data. And after hearing Professor Miller's presentation and Professor Quintanilla's presentation, there's a lot of things regarding data. So in order to create new structures, to create innovation, we need to collect data, we need to process data, we need to analyze and understand those data. And when we are talking about personal data around the world, privacy and data protection is a hot topic at this time. So you have privacy laws in Canada, such as PIPEDA. You have privacy laws in Europe, such as the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. And now we have a new legal framework in Brazil regarding processing personal data. Last year, the LGPD, which is the Brazilian General Data Protection Law, came into effect. And the LGPD sets forth principles and requirements that you have to abide by when you are processing data. So when we are thinking about new structures and innovation in general, you also need to consider if you can actually process personal data. And the first thing I wanted to mention is that the Brazilian Charter for Smart Cities, one of the main strategic objectives that there are in this charter is that we need to create a data governance structure that is transparent, that protects privacy, and that can actually be ensured by the government, by the private initiative when they are trying to implement smart cities and trying to implement all kinds of those innovations that we talk about here in transit, on car sharing and things like that. One of the main issues that we have at this time regarding processing personal data, it's actually related to processing sensitive personal data. So there's a lot of initiatives around the world regarding facial recognition. And facial recognition is one of those things that is a hot topic because it could actually yield a lot of results, but it could yield a lot of wrong results. So you can try to find someone, and what you will discover is that the technology sometimes will actually give you some wrong results. And when we are talking about processing personal data and processing sensitive personal data, you need to have, under the LGPD, a specific legal basis. You need to have some kind of authorization. It might be the consent from the data subject. It might be a different legal basis that exists under the LGPD. So in order to create new things, and in order to think about, hey, how can we actually implement this project that will enhance transit in Brazil and will enhance things like, let's say, car sharing that Professor Quintanilla was explaining. We need to understand where we're gonna park those cars, and we need to understand how many people will use those cars, what we will do with that. We need to process personal data. So let's see if we are complying with the principles set forth by the law. And the main principles that we can mention here is that you need to have a specific purpose for processing personal data. You need to only process data that is adequate and necessary for those kind of purposes. So let's say, and this is one of the things that before the LGPD and before a lot of those data privacy laws around the world, companies and government used to collect all data that they could. So they would say, hey, let's collect everything that we can. Let's collect how many people use the car and how many miles they drive, where they park, for how long, and things like that. Nowadays, due to the LGPD and due to data privacy laws around the world, you actually should only collect and process the data that is needed for one specific purpose. So this is one of the things that you have to have in mind when you are thinking about creating a new structure, creating a new project. What kind of data I actually need to collect, and for why I need to collect the data. Another thing that is relevant here is under the LGPD, under the Brazilian data protection law, the data subjects, which are all of us here, we are all data subjects. The data subjects have a lot of rights. So they have a right of erasure, they have a right of access, they have a right to come to a company and say, hey, I wanted to know of the data that you process about me, and I wanted to get a copy of this data because I need to understand if you are actually processing this data according to the law, or if you are by any chance violating the law. And right now, mainly in Brazil, but also in Europe, those kinds of laws, data privacy laws, they carry a lot of sanctions and huge fines, and the possibility of ordering a company not to process data anymore. And if you are non-compliant, if you are not compliant with the law, you might be subject to receive a high fine. You might be subject to receive actually a lot of attention from the public. In Brazil at this time, data protection is a topic that usually is on the news, is on newspaper. You can read about ransomware attacks every week in Brazil at this time. So everyone is actually focusing on privacy and data protection, how those are relevant fundamental rights, and how those need to be protected, even when we are structuring a project for smart cities. Under the Brazil Charter for Smart Cities, and under that specific objective that I mentioned to you, the objective of having a data governance structure, there's also things like complying with the LGPD and with other data privacy laws in Brazil. So prior to the LGPD, which came into effect last year, we had the Consumer Defense Code, we have the Civil Rights Framework for the Internet. All of those laws already mentioned something about processing personal data, but now having a specific law, a comprehensive law that all kinds of sectors and that all kinds of individuals and companies need to comply, it's a different thing. So these days, data protection is a really important topic. And when we are thinking about any kind of innovation, but especially when we are thinking about smart cities or any kind of smart things, so smartphones, smart fridges, and any kind of smart world, we are in the need to look at the law and understand the legal requirements and understand how you can actually transfer data abroad. A lot of those initiatives involve transferring personal data from Brazil to Canada from Brazil, or to other places. There are also legal requirements for transferring data abroad to other countries. So this is just to mention that at this time, there's a lot of things that we need to be careful when we are collecting data and when we are processing data. I'm of course only talking about personal data, so data that can actually identify an individual. So when we are talking about corporate data, when we are talking about just mileage that is not linked to an individual, this is not personal data, it's not under the law, but any other kind of stuff that you can actually find out who is the individual behind that data. So let's say you're gonna take a card and you're gonna pass your card when you go into the bus. You can probably link that data of the time the person took the bus, how long did she ride, and where did they exit, or things like that. When you can link this data to an individual, you have personal data and you have to comply with the data protection law. I'm going to leave it here because I know we have time for questions and I know we are running late. But if you have any questions about legal requirements, we can talk further about, in Brazil, there's a lot of laws. It's like Germany. I'm not sure how it is in Canada, but in Brazil, we have too many laws. And to understand if you can actually implement a project and what you have to do, we would need to review the project on a case-by-case scenario. And at least when you are processing personal data, you would need to comply with the LGBT. But I'll leave it here because I know we have a time for questions, and then after that, we have a time for closing remarks. But thank you again. Thank you, Carolina, and thank you, the BCCC.
Thank you, Felipe, for this very short explanation, but like very focused explanation. Appreciate you. So I'll pass the mic now to Marcio then, who's going to moderate some of the questions and ask a couple questions for the panelists. I'd like to invite Professor Quintanilla and Professor Miller to join us back here. So I'm just going to, so Marcio, with you.
Thank you, Carolina. Well, super interesting, especially for someone like me that is active in the field but not technical. Well, the first question, and again, I would direct that for Professor Miller, is in Canada, how well or how easy does the middle class is willing to engage in these new transportation modules? Middle class traditionally is used to have their own cars, their own comfort, and smart transit means public transportation's smart public transportation, but nevertheless public. So how is the middle class in Canada adopting or taking to the new smart city proposals?
Oh, good question. I think it's still very much an open question. I think we have seen in terms of the ride-hailing type services, the Ubers, Lyfts, etc., there has been quite a good uptake of that, but it's very generational. The millennials, the 20-somethings and 30-somethings are using it. I think we have, Uber came into Toronto in the fall of 2016. I think over the next 2-3 years, we saw quite an uptake among, let's say, the more middle-aged people of that service as they got used to it. I think the big question is more the, ride sharing and car sharing, giving up your private car. I think it's far from clear to me that what the uptake of that will be or what the incentives for them to take it up. So while I may well use Uber when it's convenient, I probably still want to have my car in the driveway for when I want to shop and this sort of thing. And I actually think in talking about sort of, carless societies or getting rid of car ownership, I think there's a lot of use cases that people aren't thinking about. My wife, when she goes grocery shopping, goes to 5 different supermarkets. And at each supermarket, she puts, a bag or 2 of groceries in the back of the car. She can't do that with Uber, right? I mean, she can't take 5 Ubers. And what does she do with her groceries from the first 3 locations when she goes to the 4th location? Families with, babies, what about car seats? So I think there are challenges, at least within, sort of classic middle-class life in Toronto that don't fit well with this notion that I don't need a car and I can just rent the car by the minute when I need it, that we have to think so. So that's not to say ride sharing, et cetera, won't have a big markets, but will it get rid of the family car? I'm not sure.
I have a second question here that actually is directed to you again, Professor Miller, but also to Professor Alberto. How accessible, and we'll start with you, Professor Miller, there. How accessible are smart technologies for mid-income cities or mid-income countries? We're thinking specifically about Brazil, of course. A lot of the technologies are fairly expensive. Implementation of smart transit isn't cheap necessarily. So how accessible in reality is this new smart cities technologies to mid-income cities?
Again, I think a very good question. I think in terms of cities, I would say they need to be very thoughtful about the cost effectiveness of the investment. And I think they really have to start with what problems will this technology actually solve, and how best can this technology be configured to help us solve a problem, and then assess how much is that going to cost versus other solutions. I was in India a couple of years ago. We had a tour there. It was about smart cities, and we went to 2 different cities in India. I won't name them. One invested a huge amount of money in a huge platform and a huge center and all sorts of sensors, and it simply wasn't clear what problems they were solving there. They'd been sold, a lot of technology, and it was really needy keen, but was the city any better off? The second city started with whatever problems, and they had problem-specific solutions, some of which were still, kind of lower tech, and so they were fitting the tool to the problem. So I think that's very important in all cases. In terms of people, I think, first of all, we orient a lot of things around smartphones, and I think I know smartphones are penetrating through lower income markets, but I think there's still an accessibility question. If your app, your service depends upon access to a smartphone and even access to a certain amount of computer literacy, I think there can be significant barriers for certain segments of people. And then just the general affordability of these ride-hailing services and so forth, that really is going to depend on the economic model. The Ubers of the world are, at least here in Toronto, tend to be cheaper than taxis, but not that much cheaper anymore. And they're losing money. So will these services actually prove to be cost effective and accessible at a price that ordinary people, let's say, can afford? I think these are open questions.
Fantastic. And before I turn to Professor Quintanilla, it's very interesting, the point on Uber, because they're also losing money in Brazil. And the question is whether they will be able to survive now that people have actually get very used to having Uber as an available service. There is this question whether the service will be able to survive. But going to Professor Quintanilla, so how does a country like Brazil and more specifically, even a city like São Paulo, which, as you pointed out, solutions here require huge investments because of the size. We're 17 billion in the city of São Paulo alone, 22 million, 23 million in the greater São Paulo metropolitan area. So how accessible are the new technologies for a city like São Paulo?
I think the main problem today related to the aspects that I point out is the metrics, the electric metrics, to expand the electromobility. The other kinds of technologies, we have good infrastructure. We are coming to 5G. We have good information from the streets in São Paulo, from the monitoring cameras, but we don't have enough electricity to develop the electrification program in São Paulo. In São Paulo, I don't know, maybe in the other parts of the country is not so problematic.
Fantastic. Carl, do we have time for one more question? It's actually a question, very interesting question for Felipe. Based on your experience, Felipe, how would you say the Brazilian legal environment would be mildly more complicated in Canada, equal, or super more complicated in Canada? For a Canadian, from a perspective of a Canadian company entering the Brazilian market, how would you sort of rate the differences?
Well, it's not an easy market. So let's say, and it's not an easy market for any kind of companies around the world. So Brazil has a lot of bureaucracy when it comes to establishing a company in Brazil, when it comes to complying with laws in Brazil. We have several dozens of laws. And every time that you're going to do business in Brazil, you need to consider aspects from tax law. You need to consider labor law, which is really different from Canada. Even data protection laws are different. So Canada, if I'm not wrong, has different laws for the public sector and the private sector when it comes to data protection. Brazil has a law that is comprehensive both for the private sector and the public sector. It's actually quite similar to GDPR, to the European General Data Protection Law, but it's really distinct from Canada laws. So I believe there's a lot of things that before coming to Brazil, before establishing a company here, or even trying to innovate in Brazil, there's a lot of legal requirements that can actually turn this a little bit a higher cost, as you were mentioning in your previous question. It takes a lot of investment, and even to comply with legal requirement, it takes a lot of investment. So you need to channel a lot of money in hiring lawyers, or actually understanding how you're going to set a company in Brazil, how you're going to make international data transfers or things like that. So it's not that close resemblance between Brazil and Canada laws. As far as I know, we have some similarities with German laws. We have some similarities with Italian laws. And as for data protection, we have a lot of similarities with the European Union laws, but not that much with Canada.
Fantastic. Well, that's my cue to say that if for any of the Canadian friends in the meeting interested in learning more or exploring more the Brazilian market, please feel free to contact me at any given time, or Carol in Toronto. We'll be more than pleased to help you navigate the Brazilian waters. So with that, with my sales pitch, I'll give back to Carol.
Thank you, Marcio. I think there is another question that I think Professor Miller is replying, but I'm just gonna throw here. I don't know if you, from a Brazilian researcher that's working abroad, talking a little bit about the cuts in recent investments in Brazil over the years. So, and then talking about the importance of equity as a future of cities, right? So giving our scenario of high inequality, the post-pandemic deterioration of social indicators, and the huge gap between reality in Canada versus Brazil, what are the real and practical actions in terms of innovation incentives, funding for research and entrepreneurship? I don't know, Marcio, if you wanted to also like step into that as well, or I wish Ted was still here. He had to leave because he would be the perfect one to answer this question.
So I started to type something, but maybe it's easier for me to just give a quick.
Say something, yeah.
It's my understanding that the state of Sao Paulo used to dedicate some of their sales tax revenue specifically to research projects within Brazil and funding students abroad. I also understand, I think that's been canceled. I think that was a tremendous program. There's no substitute for investing in young people. I think Brazil had the program, what was it? Science Without Borders, where I think they sent people away to school. I've had one student who's just finishing under that program. Again, I think these are very important programs. The trick is to get people to come home again. If you send people away, have them come home. An example I would use is Chile. In the 80s and 90s, they had a very explicit program. They took their very best students and found them, places to do their PhD in the UK, the US, Canada. But those students came back to Chile. And now they have sort of an academic community there that is incredibly strong. And they no longer have to send their students away because they've built their domestic universities. So it's easier said than done. But it's not like anything. I think you have to invest if you want to have some, some return on investment.
Here, I'll jump in quickly here just to mention, obviously the Brazil Without Borders is not in place anymore. However, a number of states across Brazil are retaking programs to send high school students abroad. Canada is one of the main destinations for a lot of Brazilian students. Very interesting because it's mid-level, so working very well. On a more higher level education and research, Brazil and Canada have maintained a science and technology agreement in place, which allows companies and often startup companies to put together projects of commercial interest to both countries. And that has been, although it's a fairly small program, modest, even considered the volumes of money that governments in both governments put. It's a highly successful program with very interesting successes that help to address some of the inequalities that you mentioned in the question. So just a few things, few points to mention that things are happening. And that this is one area that Brazil and Canada do have strong collaboration as well.
Yeah.
Carolina.
Since I'm going to loop in Marcelo for the closing remarks because I know that he has insights on that too. So Marcelo, to you.
Thanks. No, I just want to add to Professor Miller and Marcio's comments. Don't forget the CIIP. Dr. Hewitt mentioned that at the beginning. So the Canada International Innovation Partnership Program, which funds research for projects dealing with commercial solutions to commercial projects. So that CIIP program, it had been different names over the past years, ISTP and whatnot, but that is still available. So for that gentleman who asked the question about funding for entrepreneurship, etc., don't forget to look to that. There's also the Canada-Brazil joint research projects as well. And that also has funding more at the academic level. So there are many programs that are available. If you look to the appropriate governing body, depending on where you are, either in Brazil or Canada, which provides funding either at the academic level and also at the commercial level. So let's not forget those projects. But those are the two that come to my mind at this time. I know there's some other ones, Governor General Awards for research for students between Canada and Brazil as well. But I can't think of all those off the top of my head at this point. But so yeah, so Carolina, are you good for me now to?
Yes.
Okay.
Marcelo, it's up to you. So we can, Marcelo, just to properly introduce then, Marcelo is the founder of Prima IP, who is a boutique intellectual property office here in Canada. He's also the chair of the BCC Innovation Science Technology Committee, an executive director and past president of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce. So without further ado, Marcelo, the mic is all yours.
Thank you, Carolina. Merci à tous pour votre présence aujourd'hui. La relation Brésil-Canada est très importante, particulièrement dans le thème de la villes intelligentes. And what I really want to do is I want to thank all the speakers today. We discussed from the speakers just some of my top notes, funding opportunities through Dr. Hewitt, Dr. Cameron, and Ambassador Nobrega talked about the current bilateral agreements between Canada and Brazil. We have a very strong relationship between the two countries. Professor Miller was very insightful in providing us, and Professor Quintanilla, just giving us some highlights on the research taking place between Canada and Brazil relating to smart cities. And Felipe was very good in providing us with a little insight on privacy and data collection. One thing that I would be remiss, because my career has been in intellectual property, is we cannot forget the opportunities, especially when we're looking at smart cities, how we collect data, how we process data, and all the technology associated with smart cities and smart mobility, and the opportunity of securing that technology through intellectual property. And I think that's important to mention. And I know that many of us at the Chamber have been working on seeing if we can get a patent prosecution highway agreement between Canada and Brazil. I know that's in the works. Just to top off, I want to thank Carolina, Mariana, and all the team at the BCCC for putting this together. That's great. And last but not least, I want to thank Marcio as well, Franceschini, for working behind the scenes, bringing in the speakers, and as always, doing an incredible job representing the Trade Commissioner Canada in Sao Paulo. So thank you again. And just I saw Smart Cities in Brazil 2021. Some of the top cities: São Paulo, Uberlândia, Campo Grande, Florianópolis, Curitiba, and in Canada we saw Toronto, Montreal, Guelph, and Bridgewater in Nova Scotia. So thanks everyone. Thank you for all your participation. Obrigado, merci.
Thank you, Marcelo. Just to add again, there's also another program that Dr. Hewitt mentioned called the New Frontiers Funding for Research that also supports Canadian researchers doing international projects. So if there's any of the Canadian researchers in smart cities here in the audience that wanted to do any projects in Brazil, there's also that option through SSHRC that's called the New Frontiers Funding. So there's a lot of opportunities. And if you have any questions about those funding opportunities, please feel free to reach out to Marcio or myself, and we can help you guide you through the process. And yes, Marcelo?
Sorry, Carolina. One last thing. For that question on entrepreneurship and funding for entrepreneurship, that's really a question about startups as well. So to that individual who asked the question in the box, reach out to your local startup and your local incubator. They're the ones who are going to have a list of potential funding sources for your startup, for what you're looking at. And they may also be able to connect you with those government entities that will be able to introduce you to the funding and hopefully the bilateral funding.
Thank you, Marcelo. This is actually a great tip. Thank you so much. So I would like to then thank everyone and all our speakers today for the incredible insights and for the information shared with us. So thank you so much, of course, Dr. Hewitt, Dr. Cameron, Ambassador Vanja Nóbrega. We have here Dr. Miller, Dr. Quintanilla from USP, Marcelo, Marcio, thank you so much for participation. Felipe, of course. I would like to thank our guests for attending the event today and our sponsors, Vale, Export Development Canada, Sescom Barrier, Brookfield, Lundin Mining, and TMX Group for the support. This event will be posted on our website in a couple of days. So if any of your colleagues has missed the discussion and wanted to watch on demand, please feel free to go to our website, www.brascanchamber.org. And if you want to understand how the BCC can support your company in doing business between Brazil and Canada, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. So thank you everyone for being here. Marcio, thank you. Merci beaucoup for your partnership. That's where my French goes. Thank you so much for your partnership in putting this second Smart Cities event together, and stay safe. And I see you all very soon. Thank you.